Lieutenant Sarah Blackwood slipped into the dimly lit bar just off base. Her weathered hands still bearing the calluses from her latest deployment. 3 weeks in hostile territory had left her craving nothing more than a quiet drink and the comforting background noise of civilian life. The Anchored Down was a popular spot for military personnel, mostly Marines from the nearby base. But tonight she'd hoped to blend in. Just another face in the crowd. Sarah had made history as one of the first women to complete SEAL training, though she never mentioned it. Her father had served with Lieutenant Audie Murphy, and that legacy of quiet strength ran in her blood. At 32, she carried herself with the confident economy of movement that marked special operators. Nothing wasted, everything purposeful. She chose a corner booth, back to the wall, eyes on the door, habits that had kept her alive during 3 tours. The bartender nodded in recognition as she ordered a whiskey neat. He was ex-Navy himself and respected her privacy, one of the reasons she frequented this place when stateside. The mission she just returned from remained classified. Extraction of high-value intelligence assets from a region where American forces officially had no presence. Her team had succeeded, but not without cost. The fresh scar along her forearm told part of that story, though she kept it covered with her jacket sleeve. As Sarah sipped her drink, the door swung open and 6 Marines entered. Already half drunk and rowdy. She recognized their type immediately. Young, cocky, with something to prove. Their leader, a sergeant with a high-end tight and too many muscles, scanned the room like he owned it. His eyes landed on Sarah, narrowed, then widened in recognition. "Well, look what we have here," he announced loud enough for his buddies to hear. "Isn't that the poster girl for the new inclusive military?" Sarah took another sip, ignoring them. She'd faced worse than drunk Marines with fragile egos. But tonight, she was tired. The wound in her side from the extraction was still healing, and the faces of the 2 civilians they couldn't save still haunted her. The Marines made their way to the bar, ordering beers and shooting glances her way. Their conversation grew louder, more pointed. Comments about women in combat roles, about lowered standards, about publicity stunts. In the corner, an older woman sat nursing a gnonic. Few would recognize Colonel Mel Tankstall out of uniform, the first black female U-2 pilot who'd later helped design special operations training protocols. But Sarah knew her immediately. Tankstall had been a guest instructor during Sarah's SEAL qualification training, pushing her harder than any of the men. The colonel caught Sarah's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement between warriors. The Marines were getting bolder now, their sergeant leading them toward Sarah's booth. She calculated her options: de-escalate, leave, or stand her ground. The weight of her concealed sidearm pressed against her ankle. A last resort she'd never consider using here. "No one saving you now, SEAL girl," the sergeant sneered as they surrounded her table. "Let's see what you're made of without your PR team around." Sarah set down her glass slowly. She'd been trained by the best. Lieutenant Susan Ann Kai's combat techniques, Colonel Eileen Collins' leadership principles. She'd survived firefights in 3 countries and extracted hostages under heavy fire just 72 hours ago. These Marines had no idea who they were challenging. And as they closed in around her booth, blocking all exits, Sarah realized this night wasn't going to end quietly after all. The sergeant planted his palms on Sarah's table, leaning in until she could smell the whiskey. On his breath, his 5 companions formed a tight semicircle, effectively cutting off any easy exit. The bar had grown quieter. Other patrons sensing the brewing confrontation. "Heard you SEALs think you're better than Marines now," the sergeant said, his voice carrying, especially the token females they're letting in. Sarah remained seated, her posture relaxed but alert. "I'm just here for a drink, Sergeant. Not looking for trouble. Too bad trouble found you." He knocked her glass over, whiskey spilling across the table. "Show us what they taught you in that watered-down training program." Sarah's mind flashed to the ridge in North Africa 3 days ago, pinned down by enemy fire, her team leader bleeding out beside her, comms jammed. That was trouble. This was just wounded pride in uniform. "Last chance to walk away," she said quietly, making eye contact with each Marine. 2 looked uncertain, but the others were committed now, audience watching. The sergeant reached for her collar. "No one saving you now." His wrist never made contact. Sarah's movement was fluid, almost casual, a technique Lieutenant Edward O'Hare had perfected for close quarters neutralization. The sergeant's arm was suddenly twisted behind him, his face pressed against the table where her drink had been. "Stand down," she advised the others. They didn't. Two lunged forward together. A mistake. Sarah pivoted, using the sergeant's body as a counterweight to kick one Marine back into the second. Both stumbled into a nearby table, sending glasses crashing. The fourth Marine, taller and more disciplined, circled to her blind side. Sarah released the sergeant with a push that sent him sprawling and turned to face the new threat. This one had training. His stance suggested boxing, maybe army combos. He threw a tight hook that would have connected if Sarah hadn't already dropped below it, sweeping his legs. As he fell, the fifth Marine grabbed her from behind, arms locking around her torso, pressing painfully against her still healing wound. Sarah felt the stitches tear, warm blood seeping through her shirt. The pain sharpened her focus. She drove her heel down onto his instep, then snapped her head back into his nose. His grip loosened enough for her to break free, but the exertion had cost her. The sixth Marine, who'd been hesitating, now moved in with the others. Sarah found herself surrounded again, blood staining her side, outnumbered and injured. The sergeant had regained his feet, rage replacing his earlier arrogance. "You're dead," he spat, reaching behind his back. Sarah saw the glint of a knife. Not standard issue, a personal blade. The situation had escalated beyond posturing. In the corner of her eye, she noticed Colonel Tingle's standing hand inside her jacket. Time slowed as Sarah accessed a combat mindset that had kept her alive in Kandahar when her extraction team was ambushed. She centered herself, remembering Colonel Anime Hayes's words during medical training. Pain is information, not an obstacle. The Marines closed in, the sergeant's knife low and ready. Sarah's options narrowed. Disable them quickly or risk serious injury. She couldn't reach her ankle holster, and using a firearm in a crowded bar was unthinkable. "Anyway, you should know," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the blood now soaking her shirt. "I wasn't trained as a Navy SEAL because I'm a woman." The sergeant lunged with a knife. "I was trained as a Navy SEAL because I was already a warrior." What happened next occurred so rapidly that witnesses would later disagree on the sequence. Sarah moved with a precision that made Lieutenant Edward O'Hare legendary. Economy of motion, devastating effect. The knife clattered to the floor as the sergeant's wrist snapped. Two more Marines went down in rapid succession, joint locks applied with surgical accuracy. The remaining three hesitated, suddenly uncertain, as they realized they were facing something far beyond what they had anticipated. The bar fell silent as Sarah stood amid the six incapacitated Marines. The sergeant clutched his broken wrist, face contorted with pain and humiliation. Two others lay groaning on the floor, one nursing a dislocated shoulder, another struggling to breathe after a precisely placed strike to his solar plexus. The remaining three were immobilized in various submission holds that Sarah had released once they stopped struggling. Blood seeped through Sarah's shirt where her wound had reopened, but she remained standing, her breathing controlled and steady. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 40 seconds. Colonel Tengestal approached, her hand no longer inside her jacket. "At ease, Lieutenant," she said, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of command. "I believe these men have learned their lesson." The bartender, a Vietnam veteran who'd served alongside Lieutenant John F. Kennedy's unit, had already called the military police. "They'll be here in 5, he announced, tossing Sarah a clean bar towel for her bleeding side. The sergeant, still on his knees, glared up at Sarah. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Actually, it is," came a new voice from the doorway. A Marine colonel stood there, his uniform immaculate, ribbons indicating multiple combat tours. "On your feet, all of you." The Marines struggled to attention, even the injured ones. The colonel walked slowly around the scene, taking in the overturned furniture, the knife on the floor, and Sarah's blood-stained shirt. "Sir," the sergeant began, "we were just, save it, Sergeant Miller." The colonel cut him off. "I received a call from Colonel Tengestal here. She thought I might want to know that 6 of my Marines were about to assault the woman who rescued me and 15 other hostages from a terrorist compound 3 days ago." The Marines' faces drained of color as they looked back at Sarah with new understanding. "Lieutenant Blackwood led the SEAL team that extracted us after our convoy was ambushed. She personally eliminated 4 enemy combatants while carrying our wounded intelligence officer to the extraction point. The mission remains classified, which is why you won't find it in any report or news story. Sarah stood straighter despite her injury. Sir, that information is necessary context, Lieutenant. The colonel interrupted. These men should understand exactly who they were threatening. The military police arrived quickly assessing the situation. The colonel instructed them to escort their Marines back to base for disciplinary action. As they were let out, the sergeant paused beside Sarah. He struggled with the words, "I was wrong about everything." Sarah met his eyes. "We all serve the same flag, Sergeant. Remember that next time." After the MPs departed with the Marines, Colonel Tennistal insisted on examining Sarah's wound. "You tore your stitches. The medic on your team would be disappointed." "Chief Ramirez has patched me up worse," Sarah replied with a slight smile. The bar patrons, mostly veterans themselves, had watched the entire scene unfold. One by one, they approached Sarah, offering quiet words of respect or simply a nod of acknowledgement. No grand speeches or dramatic salutes, just a simple recognition between those who understood the true weight of service and sacrifice. Later that night, as a Navy corpsman restitched her wound at the base medical facility, Sarah received a message. The Marine colonel had recommended her for a combination and more surprisingly requested that she conduct joint training sessions with his unit on close-quarters combat techniques. "They could learn from you," his message read, not as a female SEAL, but as a superior warrior. 6 months later, Sarah stood before a mixed group of Marines and Navy personnel, including the sergeant with a now-healed wrist. They watched attentively as she demonstrated the techniques that had saved her life multiple times in combat zones across the world. The enemy doesn't care about your gender, your background, or your feelings. Neither does death. The only thing that matters in combat is whether you've prepared yourself to be the most effective warrior possible. The sergeant, now her most dedicated student, nodded in understanding. The bar incident had faded into base legend, but its impact remained not as a story about a woman proving herself, but as a reminder that true warriors recognize and respect each other beyond the superficial. As Sarah watched her students pair off for practice, Colonel Tingastal joined her at the edge of the training floor. "You've changed them," the colonel observed. I shook my head. "They changed themselves. I just showed them the way." That Colonel Tennisto said with a knowing smile is what real leadership looks like.